10 years after Japan first floated the idea of turning helicopter destroyers into real carriers, that plan finally met reality at sea. On a humid morning in the Western Pacific in mid-2025, south of Iwo Jima, a Japanese P-3C patrol aircraft swept past two Chinese aircraft carriers, Liaoning and Shandong, drilling together for the first time in those waters. Tokyo put out a calm statement. Beijing called it routine training. US analysts quietly noted something else. Russia's closest major partner now had dual carrier operations pushing deep into the Pacific, right on Japan's doorstep. Then the detail that changed the tone. Chinese J-15 fighters from Shandong made unusually close passes on that Japanese P-3C. The flight profile looked less like normal intercepts and more like a stress test of pilots, procedures, and political red lines. Within weeks, US and Japanese forces were running their largest air power display from Kadena, lining up dozens of jets in a very public reminder of who still dominates the skies over the Ryukyus. On paper, just another busy season. In practice, it raised a simple question. When Russia's ally pushes this close to Japan, how fast does the US Navy step in? In mid-2025, over waters south of Iwo Jima, a Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force P-3C, Orion tracked Chinese carrier groups, while other Japanese ships shadowed them at standoff range. The Maritime Self-Defense Force brings specific tools to this mission. P-3C and newer P-1 patrol aircraft run anti-submarine sweeps and surface surveillance. AEGIS destroyers, like the Maya and Otago classes, provide air defense umbrellas, and their SPY-1 radars track targets hundreds of kilometers out. The Izumo-class helicopter destroyers, now modified for F-35B operations, offer limited fixed-wing strike capability for the first time in Japan's post-war history. But capability on paper meets reality in sortie tempo. How many patrol flights can the Maritime Self-Defense Force realistically generate in a day from bases like Atsugi and Kanoya? When two Chinese carriers are flying round-the-clock drills, the answer matters more than specifications. Japanese defense white papers now label China, Russia's partner, as the greatest strategic challenge, warning of expanding joint drills with Moscow around Japan's periphery. On a map, it looks like lines and symbols. In the cockpit, it feels like being the thin, grey ring between China's carriers and Japan's islands. Shift the camera to the Chinese task group in the Western Pacific. Near Iwo Jima, Liaoning and Shandong maneuvered in parallel, the first time both operational carriers drilled together this far from home waters. Both carriers use ski jump decks, launching J-15 fighters that must carry reduced fuel and weapons loads compared to catapult-launched aircraft. Their sortie rates fall well short of American supercarriers. Open-source analysts estimate each ship can generate perhaps 2 to 3 dozen fighter sorties per day under ideal conditions, far fewer when operating far from Chinese ports and support ships. Dual carrier operations compensate for individual platform limits. 2 decks mean more aircraft cycling, more flexibility, and more resilience if one ship needs maintenance. On the horizon sits Fujian, China's newest carrier, with electromagnetic catapults and a larger air wing. Its recent sea trials hint at a leap in sortie generation when it joins the fleet. These drills serve a strategic purpose, projecting power beyond the first island chain and normalizing carrier presence near Japan and Taiwan. On paper, Liaoning and Shandong were training. In Tokyo's operations rooms, they looked like a rehearsal for showing up whenever Beijing wants. Cut to Kadena Air Base in Okinawa, about 6 months before the dual carrier drill. The United States staged its largest ever elephant walk there, with F-35 fighters, F-15 fighters, tankers, helicopters, and drones crawling down the runway in a mass display of available air power. The typical United States Navy presence in the region centers on a carrier strike group, often USS Ronald Reagan or a rotating Pacific-based carrier, plus cruisers, destroyers, and attack submarines that regularly train alongside the MSDF. Alliance architecture makes this coordination possible. Defense guidelines between the United States and Japan allow integrated planning and shared surveillance, even though Japan's constitution still technically labels its forces as self-defense. But even impressive platforms face hard limits. Deployment cycles rotate carriers in and out. Maintenance backlogs constrain availability. Magazine depth, how many missile ships actually carry, looks finite against growing Chinese inventories. So when China sailed 2 carriers toward Japan, the question in Washington was not just whether we could show up, it was how long we could stay if this became the new normal. Visualize a slow zoom from the East China Sea to the Philippine Sea, highlighting the Ryukyus, Taiwan, and key choke points like the Miyako Strait. Chinese and Russian ships and bombers have routinely transited around Japan and through these straits in recent years, often prompting Japanese scrambles and tracking missions. The numbers add up. Hundreds of intercept sorties annually, each one wearing down airframes and crews. China, as Russia's partner, seeks routes out into the Pacific that bypass narrow, heavily monitored channels. That elevates the importance of Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force patrols near Iwo Jima and beyond, deep water where carriers can maneuver without squeezing through island gaps. But geography cuts both ways. Japan's long, thin island arc is hard to defend continuously. Sustaining constant coverage stretches crews and airframes across thousands of kilometers. If you want to see where great power competition actually lives, do not stare at speeches. Look at these gaps between islands. In recent years, joint Russian-Chinese bomber patrols have circled near Japan and South Korea, sometimes timed with regional summits to maximize political signal. The no-limits partnership declared by Moscow and Beijing in 2022 included pledges of deeper military cooperation. Joint exercises have grown in scale and frequency. That includes naval drills in the Sea of Japan, combined air patrols, and now Chinese carriers operating near waters where Russian forces also conduct activity. For the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force, this creates a multi-front problem. The force is built around anti-submarine warfare and defensive sea lines of communication. It is not structured to simultaneously chase dual-carrier groups in the Pacific and handle joint Russian-Chinese signaling in the Sea of Japan and around Hokkaido. When Russia's closest ally runs carrier operations near Iwo Jima, it is not just about China. It is about who Tokyo has to plan for on every horizon at once. By the late 2020s, Japanese defense white papers openly described China as the greatest strategic challenge, and they announced plans for long-range counterstrike missiles and increased spending. The hardware changes are visible. Izumo-class ships are being converted to operate F-35B aircraft, marking Japan's first fixed-wing carrier aviation since World War II. Tokyo has purchased Tomahawk cruise missiles from the United States. Aegis destroyers are receiving upgrades to their missile defense capabilities. But despite budget increases, Japan still caps itself politically and constitutionally. Using these capabilities in a crisis would require major domestic consensus and tight coordination with the US sortie tempo returns as the constraint that matters. Even with F-35B aircraft at sea, how many jets can Japan actually field on short notice? Chinese and Russian land bases and carriers combined can generate far more sorties than Japan's converted helicopter carriers. Japan is finally buying the tools of a frontline power. Using them is a bigger political leap than ordering them. Cut between official strategy speeches in Washington and live fire exercises around Japan and Guam. US doctrine now emphasizes distributed operations and integrated deterrence. In plain language, more small, spread-out units that can survive missile salvos, networked together with allies like Japan, rather than concentrated in a few large bases. The reasoning is straightforward. Forward bases like Kadena and Yokosuka sit within range of growing Chinese missile inventories. US planners worry about base survivability in the early hours of a conflict. Runways cratered, fuel depots burning, aircraft caught on the ground. Alliance architecture increasingly assumes Japan will provide key maritime patrols, logistics, and basing, not just political support, when dealing with China and indirectly its partner Russia. That's why a single P-3C getting buzzed near Iwo Jima is not just a flight safety issue. It is a live action test of the whole US and Japan playbook. In mid-2025, a JMSDF P-3C patrol south of Iwo Jima was approached at close range by J-15 fighters from Shandong multiple times, at altitudes and distances Japan later called dangerous. Standard intercept procedures exist for a reason. International norms specify safe separation distances. Radio calls establish intent. Repeated close passes violate those norms, stress aircrews, and increase the risk of collision or miscalculation. Such behavior is often used to probe reaction thresholds. Each aggressive pass that goes unanswered normalizes more aggressive patterns. It is a tactic seen in other theaters, the South China Sea, the Baltic, the Black Sea. The P3C is not armed to respond. Its job is to keep sensors on and collect data, relying on broader alliance presence for deterrence. On radar, it may be a few blips converging. In strategy terms, it is a question: how many of these can you tolerate before you have to change the way you fly? Shortly after the dual carrier drills, US Navy and MSDF ships conducted joint exercises in nearby waters. Aircraft from US carriers and Kadena practiced coordinated air defense and anti-surface warfare alongside Japanese counterparts. The technical integration is real. US destroyers and Japanese AEGIS ships share tracking data through cooperative engagement systems. Fighters coordinate combat air patrol, handing off targets across national boundaries. The message to Beijing, and indirectly to Moscow, is that harassment of Japanese patrols raises the cost of miscalculation. But logistics constrain how long this can last. Fuel consumption spikes during high-tempo operations. Munitions expended in exercises must be replaced. Crew fatigue accumulates. The political cost of sustaining such a presence every time Beijing runs a drill adds up. Sortie tempo again. The US and Japan can surge jets today. Doing that week after week is a different story. So yes, the US Navy steps in fast. The real question is how often it can keep doing that without breaking something else. Overlay graphics of Chinese anti-ship missile ranges on the map of US and Japanese bases and carrier operating areas. The coverage is extensive. China has invested heavily in long-range anti-ship and land attack missiles, the DF-21D, DF-26, and newer systems designed to threaten ships and bases across the Western Pacific. The US and Japan are racing to expand their own stockpiles and dispersal options. Magazine. Depth matters in simple terms. How many missiles and interceptors do ships and bases actually carry, and how quickly would they need resupply if a crisis escalated? The answer for most surface combatants is measured in days of intensive combat, not weeks. Even if US forces and Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force are technically superior platform for platform, they operate under constant missile threat. That forces them to stay moving, dispersed, and ready to ride out an opening salvo rather than concentrating firepower. On the surface, this looks like a duel of carriers and destroyers. Underneath it is a numbers game of missiles, reload times, and who runs dry first. Cut to Japanese crews drilling damage control on destroyers, Chinese deck crews launching and recovering J-15 aircraft on Shandong, and US sailors practicing joint communications with Maritime Self-Defense Force counterparts. Frequent joint exercises increase interoperability, but also strain personnel, especially for Japan's relatively small force. Training pipelines must produce enough qualified sailors, pilots, and maintainers to man new platforms while keeping existing ones operational. Recruitment and retention challenges affect all three major players. China's rapid shipbuilding has outpaced its ability to train experienced crews. Japan faces demographic pressures. The US Navy struggles with retention in critical ratings. These human limits constrain what hardware can actually do. A ship without a full crew, or a crew without recent training, operates below its technical potential. Every headline talks about new hulls and new jets. The real limit might be how many trained crews you can put on deck without burning them out. Return to the political capitals. Tokyo debates defense bills. Washington talks Indo-Pacific strategy. Beijing frames its drills as defensive. Moscow praises strategic coordination. The core tension is visible. US and Japan responses are meant to deter China and, by extension, its partner Russia. But each show of force can also feed narratives of encirclement and justify more drills on the other side. Domestic politics in Japan, the US, and China set real limits. No side wants a war. None wants to look weak in front of allies or rivals. Sortie tempo closes the loop. Constant message sending flights and sailings consume readiness that might be needed for a real crisis. Every patrol flown today is maintenance deferred, crew rest sacrificed, magazine depth unchanged. So when a single P3C gets harassed near Iwo Jima and a whole alliance machinery spins into motion, the question becomes, are we stabilizing the region or just raising the floor of what normal looks like? Fade back to the Western Pacific. Chinese carriers practice launch and recovery. A Japanese destroyer tracks them from the horizon. Somewhere beyond, a US carrier group holds station, aircraft cycling on deck as night falls. What has changed is now visible in the pattern. Dual Chinese carrier drills in the Pacific have become real, not theoretical. Japanese defense documents explicitly cite concern over cooperation between China and Russia. The US Navy can still show up fast, but now manages global commitments under tighter constraints than a decade ago. No shot was fired in this episode, yet every unsafe intercept, every close pass, and every carrier deployment nudges the temperature higher. The camera lingers on a satellite view of the region at night, thin chains of lights along Japan's islands, a faint silhouette of carriers at sea, radar coverage arcs invisible but implied. On paper, it's still peacetime, just drills and patrols. Out here, between Russia's ally, Japan's grey hulls, and the US decks over the horizon, you can already feel the shape of the next crisis being drawn.